Unfortunately, sometimes your past mistakes may come back to haunt you, and sometimes for a very, very long time. And this is especially true for financial mistakes that you make, and more specifically, mistakes that you make related to your credit. Credit problems can stick to your credit score and even your credit report for sometimes up to a decade. And because your credit report and your credit score is routinely used by others to judge whether or not you're financially responsible and whether or not they want to do business with you, any problems or negative remarks on your credit report could cost you a lot in the future. And one of those times is when a landlord is checking your credit report or your credit score when screening and whether or not he or she wants to rent to you as a tenant. Vincent Chan here from The Simple Dollar, and in today's video we're going over 3 main topics. The first is, why do landlords look at your credit report? 2, what exactly do they look out for? And 3, if your credit score or your credit report is poor and that costs you your opportunity to rent a place, we're going over a couple of tips that you definitely want to pay attention to on how you can still rent a place. And if that sounds good to you, make sure you smash that like and subscribe button, because here at The Simple Dollar, we're going over money and personal finance in every single video. And as always, you can always check out more information down below in the description box or visit thesimpledollar.com. Like we mentioned earlier, a lot of businesses do a credit report check because they want to see whether or not that person is financially responsible and whether or not there is any risk involved in doing business with them. And landlords are no exception. The main reason landlords want to do a credit check on any potential tenants is because they want to see what is the likelihood that that potential tenant is going to pay on time or not at all. Tenants that do not pay their rent on time can be really, really expensive for the landlord, as well as cause a lot of aggravation. And naturally, no one wants to go through that, especially if they're renting out their own place for people. When checking your credit, a landlord will typically request a tenant screening report from one of the credit reporting agencies, and typically the potential tenant will be the one that actually foots the bill for the screening process. Tenant screening reports typically contain a lot more information than just what the credit score is or a typical credit report. In fact, it contains a lot of information, and all this information is really helpful and important for the landlord to help make them make an informed decision on whether or not they should rent to you. Your credit score and credit report are of course not the only things that the landlord will look into when they determine whether or not you're a good applicant. They'll look into other stuff such as your employment history, whether or not you're still employed, and a whole slew of other information. However, even if your application is perfect and is really, really good, if you have a negative credit report or negative credit score, then that might cost you the opportunity in signing a lease with the landlord. And before we get into the red flags that landlords typically look for, make sure you smash the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to be always kept up to date with this information. One thing that landlords would look for is public reports and derogatory events, such as evictions, foreclosures, bankruptcies, or even open collection accounts. And having any of these and even more could negatively impact your new rental application. Unless these events have happened a very, very long time ago and you have some really good explanation for why they happened, such as someone was severely sick or you have recently lost a job, then more likely than not, the landlord will typically reject your application on these bases, especially if these has happened very, very recently. The second thing that landlords look out for is whether or not you have any outstanding debt problems. And what that means is they want to check out your credit report and see whether or not you're overextended financially, and if you are, then that might be a red flag on your application. Just like a mortgage lender, a landlord will typically look into your debt to income ratio, which is a percentage of your monthly income that is currently reserved for paying off outstanding debts, in order to determine how much money you would have left over to actually pay the rent for the new place. If your debt to income ratio is from 45 to 55%, of course depending on your landlord, then your application might straight out be rejected even before they check out your credit score or look more into the rest of your application. Because pretty much, if you don't have the money, then you don't have the money. And before I get into some things you can do if your credit score or your credit report does cost the opportunity for you to rent for places, make sure you check out the description down below and check out thesimpledollar.com to learn more information about personal finance and money. If your tenant report screening comes back with a couple of blemishes, don't worry, there are 2 strategies that we are going to recommend on how you can actually still find a place to rent in the future. The first strategy is to offer to put more money down. If you actually go to your landlord and tell him or her that you're willing to pay a few months of rent in advance, that it can actually improve your chances of getting your application approved. Mainly because that kind of decreases your risk of non-payment for that landlord, and they can see you as a better opportunity as a tenant. The second strategy is to just look for another place or another landlord. The reality is, although the tenant screening process is pretty commonplace, not all landlords actually go through with it and not all of them would actually look at it. And even if they do, sometimes they'll just accept an explanation and still let you rent, even if there are some derogatory remarks or if you have a poor credit report. And especially if the landlord is an individual rather than a property management company that's trying to rent out their place, then you are more likely to be accepted. If you can prove to your landlord that you have turned a new financial leaf and that you are more financially responsible now, then your landlord will be more likely and more willing to let you rent from them. As always, if you have any questions on this content, make sure you comment down below and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. And remember to hit the subscribe button for the simple dollar if you want more content on money and personal finance. Anyways, thank you for watching. Vincent Chan signing off.